How many of you got to come with us to Pride Parade a couple weeks ago? There we go. That was a bunch of fun. When we were there, one of the cars that was driving by was like ABC 7 News or something like that, and it was a weatherman on there. And I just started to think to myself, like, how is this still a job? Like, how is it still a job that you wait till 5 or 6 o'clock to know what the weather is going to be tomorrow? It's insane. I was thinking about it, like, you know the helicopter guys, like, used to turn on the radio, like 1027, to, like, find out what the traffic is? I'm like, is that job still exist? Are there still people out there, like, get in a helicopter, and they're like, sure, we got a SIG alert on the 210, SIG alert. Who would listen to that? Who would wait around for these things? And it made me begin to think about the reality that sometimes there's just tools in life that we used to use that are no longer helpful to us now. That things have evolved and things have changed. You've evolved and you've changed. And there's tools in your life, in your faith, in your spiritual journey that are not helpful to you any longer. And there are new tools that you need to take on, and you don't have to rely on those other ones any longer. Today we're going to be talking about and looking at the story of Jesus where he calms the storm and he's sleeping in the boat and he speaks to the winds and the waves and they calm down. And whether you've been to church or not been in church, it's just one of those famous stories. And I remember being a young kid in a mega church, like an evangelical mega church, and the pastor said, there's just 3 kinds of storms in life. And I'm sure he sounded like this, brothers and sisters, right? You're either in a storm or you're coming out of one or you're going into one. And I'll always remember that. And in some ways, it's kind of true. There are just always storms in life. And that analogy or metaphor just works. To be human means that storms are coming, or that you've been through one, or that one is ahead of you, or that you're in one currently. I believe that reality. What I don't believe are the tools that I was given to deal with storms in other seasons of my life, as I would call like 8 Corys ago. And you all have those different you versions, that many versions ago. In the 8 Corys ago, how I would navigate the storms is I believed in my conservative Christianity because I am faithfully following Jesus, which meant that I would read my Bible every morning and pray, right? That storms would not affect me. That's what I was told. If I'm faithful, then God's going to take care of it. Did any of you hear a message similar to that? How many of you were faithful? And did the storms still come? And so it's not a helpful tool. Don't use the tools that you were given previously if they're not going to help you now. I think a more honest assessment is simply the reality that storms are going to come no matter what. Some storms happen because they are your making. I've been there. Some storms are going to happen because they are the making of other people. Sometimes it's a mix of those things. Sometimes the more I go through a storm and I'm like, how is this happening to me? Woe is me. I get on the other side, then you're like, I kind of had a little part of that. That's a little bit of me. And sometimes there's just horrible things that have nothing to do with anybody. Next week, I'm going to be at a funeral next door for Luke, 19 years old, went to college this year, found out that he has a brain tumor, started drooling, couldn't move, was at CHLA 2 weeks later, and he passed away a month ago. Family, friends. There's no good answers for that. Some of you were in churches where they said horrible things. Well, God only gives his toughest test to God's toughest soldiers. That's not helpful. That's actually psychotic. And don't listen to things like that. God's not playing games with you. God's not trying to make you tougher by making you go through storms. God's not trying to hurt you. God's not trying to make you do more difficult things. I think the reality of it is simply just, storms just are. They just are. I don't have rhyme or reason for it. I don't think that we have, it's part of the mysteries of life of why do bad things happen to good people? And sometimes the answer is we just don't know. The unhelpful tools that we were given is we would call it faith, but what we really meant was certitude. You have no certitude in some of those things. It's called faith for a reason, because there will just be storms that you get into. And you don't have an answer why, and there's no good reason. Sometimes your realization is that you were a part of it. But we have faith that God will be there with us, that we can grow and evolve in those storms, and that the people around us in the boat will make a difference. And that's what we want to talk about today. How do we navigate these storms? What are the tools that we have? And what are the relationships that we have to them? And maybe we can develop some different tools that actually work for us in our faith in 2024. To talk about these things, talk about storms, we're going to talk about some things. We're going to talk about some storm tools, and if we can talk about that, then we can talk about what naming storms looks like, and if we can talk about naming some storms, then we can talk about some observations and some practices for our life that might be helpful. If we can make some observations and talk about some practices, then we can talk about God and our relationship to God in the storms. And if we can talk about God, then we can talk about others and their part in our lives. And if we can talk about others, then we have to take a hard look at ourselves. And if we can talk about ourselves, then maybe together we can evolve. Follow along with me in Mark chapter 4. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat, and there were also other boats with him. When I read the Gospels, I begin to find out more and more and more that sometimes the things that I was told as a kid were not helpful. Most of what I was told about the Gospels when I was younger is that there's the people that are in and there's people that are out. And generally the people that were in my church were the ones that were in, and then the people that were out were very out, and we let them know that they were out, and then generally we let them know that they were going to hell. They weren't just like out a little bit, like eternal damnation. Talk about a good time, right? But what I see in the Gospels is Jesus never talks about any of those things. Isn't that fascinating? What I see often is that the Gospels are actually telling us the opposite story of what I was given. Jesus leaves the crowds behind. He doesn't take the crowds into the storm. Jesus takes his disciples into the storm. And I think that's fascinating for me. I think we're often told, like, those people out there are going to deal with God's judgments. I don't think actually see that's what happens. What I love about the Gospel of Mark so far is that there's just two kind of paths that Jesus presents. There's the crowds and there's his followers. But it's not, there's crowds and followers like, these are the people that are going to hell and you're the chosen ones. No, it's all about a life of transformation that Jesus is offering. What Jesus says again and again and again, whenever he sees the crowds, do you know what Jesus does? He condemns them to hell and tells them that they're, oh wait, that's not what he does. He heals everyone, it says. They constantly came to him with the sick and the weary and the demon-possessed, or whatever the thing is, analogy, metaphor, you can place it for yourselves. But Jesus just healed everyone. That's what Jesus did to the crowds. No condemnation, no judgment, no guilt, just a God who heals. A God who understands, I can observe your life in a way that you can't observe it. I have things for you that maybe you don't have for yourself. And whether you even know that you need me, I just want to bring healing and goodness and healing and goodness and healing and goodness for you. You may never recognize it, see it, want it, whatever, but that's just what Jesus does. And then Jesus says this, now if you want to follow me, I'm going to show you this life of transformation. But then he'll also say crazy things like this. Those of you that actually want to follow me, you're going to lose your life before you find it. You're going to go through the dark night of the soul. You're going to go through some transformation and maturity. Jesus will even use language. And he'll say, wide is the path that leads to destruction. And it's not about, again, who's going to hell, and narrow is the path that leads to life. Jesus is saying, if you want to go do the life thing, it's just hard work, to be honest. Going to therapy is just harder than not. Going to the gym is just harder than not. Doing the work in your life, having self-awareness is harder than not. Breaking familial bonds of trauma is just harder than not doing it. Saying no to the old church that told you that something wrong with you, it's harder to leave it. It's just harder. But Jesus says, I have come that you may have life and life to the fullest. Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy burdened, that I may give you rest for your soul. That's what Jesus is offering. And if you don't choose it, he's like, cool. I'll still heal you whenever you come around. And I'm not going to take you on the boat for this one. And that's totally okay. But for those of you who want to follow me, I'm just letting you know, storms are real. They're going to be in your life. And I want to give you some different tools for how you deal with them. What a different relationship we can have with Jesus if Jesus isn't out there excluding people. If Jesus is just out there healing people. But like any good coach, would you go to a gym and in that gym, they just said, I want to tell you about sit-ups. Let me tell you about these sit-ups. Let me tell you about core exercises. Let me tell you about a healthy diet. Let me tell you this magical word. I call it vegetables. Like, let me tell you these things. No, you would never go to that gym anymore. You'd be like, why am I wasting my time here? You go because it's going to be difficult. You go because you got to do the sit-ups. You go because it's challenging your core exercises. You go because there's another part of health that you want in your life. And it's not condemning anyone that's not doing it. It's just saying that if you want to be on this path of healing and transformation, it's just going to take an effort from you. But also at times you're going to need something beyond yourself, and we call that thing faith. And we call that thing God. And the story of Jesus, what Jesus shows us is that God is with us. That God is for us. And that God is always ahead of us in these storms. That much we have. There's no promises that storms aren't going to happen. It's just the reality that God is with us in them. That God is for us in the midst. And that God is ahead of us even when we can't see it ourselves. Sometimes deductibles just get paid, my friends. Sometimes they don't. But that doesn't mean that God's not in the boat. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat that it was nearly swamped, and Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. And the disciples woke him to say, "Teacher, don't you care if we drowned?" And isn't this true early in our life when it comes to spiritual transformation, that what we really want from God is just to be the magical God and to know when things are wrong and just to fix it? What we get in more mature spiritual transformation is we know, oh, God's here. Maybe it feels like God is sleeping. Maybe it feels like God fell asleep at the wheel. Remember when we used to have like bumper stickers like Jesus is my co-pilot? That's so weird, by the way. I had one in my most conservative evangelical days. Guys, this is going to make you vomit. It makes me vomit to say it a little bit. I had the license plate that said, in case of rapture, this will be an unmanned vehicle. That was 8 Corys ago, my friends. 8 Corys ago. I give grace for that Cory, for what he believed about the world, what he believed was going on, and that's not Cory now, but we have a different version of what God is doing in the storms. In all of those versions that many of us were given in that version of conservative evangelical Christianity, God is just simply trying to get us out of here. God doesn't like this place. It's not good. In fact, it's evil, and God just wants to evacuate everybody. Beam me up, Scotty. Get on the elevator and leave it behind. And yet we don't see anything like that in the life of Jesus. In fact, in the life of Jesus, we're invited into the storm so that we can heal and that we can transform, because when we have a better observation of the storms in our life, that what Jesus finds is that we have the ability to go help other people in their storms as well. That's the invitation. Would you get healed so that you could heal some other people along the way? And then as you do that, whatever business you create or jobs you have or relationships that take place or the things that are just of life, you're just going to navigate those things better. You're just going to navigate those things in a different way. That's what Jesus is inviting you into. And so the tools that we want to take along the way is our observation. Can we just observe with different eyes what's taking place? Again, 8 Corys ago, I observed the world in an exclusive way, and God chose me. Everyone else is going to hell or some version of that, and things were always going to work out. Until I realized that I was an addict, and no one gave me the language for that in the church. They just told me to stop lusting and to pray, and that it would all go away, and then it didn't go away. I just thought if I just get married young, then God, you'll take away these feelings. If I just get married young, then she'll heal me. Then I won't have to deal with the trauma that my family's been in for 4 years. I won't have to deal with the addiction that my sister's in. I won't have to deal with the abuse that I have. God, if I just do this over here, I'm going to be okay. And I wasn't. I got married, and I cheated on her. I was unfaithful. I was deeper into my addiction than I ever was before because these tools just didn't work. And then the journey comes along where I can begin to observe myself and be gracious to myself. I'm not a horrible sinner going to hell. I'm just somebody who's never been taught how to cope with their life. I was just somebody who was never taught how to care for themselves. I was somebody who was taught that God would magically take away storms, and God didn't magically take away storms, and I found myself deeper underwater than I ever was before. Maybe you can relate. But as I evolved, as I observed myself, I began to have a different perspective about what God was doing. God wasn't magically trying to take care of everything for me. God was just with me. What I learned along the way is I also just got to be with God. And that is huge. This beautiful reality that the divine, that we, get to live in this beautiful unity and harmony and goodness. That's the magic of what it means to be human. When we experience of that, taste of that. And the truth is, most often in my life, I have found that goodness in storms. I say it in here all the time. Conflict forces evolution. I've done so much premarital counseling and coaching and this or that, and I get it. 90% of your relationship, you're so good with that person. But the 10% of conflict, that's what ruins everything for everybody. That's where it gets difficult in any job, in any relationship, in any marriage, your relationship to yourself. Conflict, storms, these things are just challenging. And that's where we learn and we grow. Because we're forced to evolve in those moments in ways that we wouldn't evolve if we were just sitting in Maui with a margarita in our hands. And I want to be in Maui, but it's just not where I've grown. I've almost only grown through the different storms. When I look at Cory 8 Corys ago, I can tell you every storm. You know how we name storms here? Like we go through this list every 6 years. We change male and female names. That's how we name hurricanes. I don't know if you know that. It's this list. I could name you like, here's Hurricane Andrew. Here's Hurricane Isla. This is when this thing happened. This is when my sister died. This is when I had a depression and anxiety. This is when I went through this betrayal. This is when I betrayed. I could tell you each of the storms in my life. But through each of those storms, what I've learned is, how can I observe them in a different way? How can I observe who God is in these storms in a different way? Not as magical genie God, but as just God who's with me. Simply with me. That's the story of faith. That there's nothing between you and God. That God is just with you. That God looks at you and just simply says, you're good. You're good. It's the simplest message that we repeat again and again and again and again at New Abbey because we just want to reverse the amnesia of the world. We want to reverse the amnesia that tells us that we're not good, that there's something wrong with us, that there's all these other things. And when we're so focused on all these other things, sometimes we just miss the messaging of God of, you are loved. You are already my child. I am already pleased with you. And like any good parent, I know that you don't know how to walk yet, but you can learn. I will hold your hand. I will walk with you gently and help you look both ways before you cross the street. One day, a little version of Cory 4 years ago, we're going to get on a bike, big guy, and we're going to ride that bike together. And one day I'm going to push you off, and you're just going to ride through. That's the good God. What a better image maybe that you need of God and what God's doing for you. That God is just for you and with you and ahead of you in that journey. And God, what if God is just as gracious about your evolution? What if God's more gracious about your evolution? I use this in here all the time. If I'm a parent of a 3-year-old and my child is at Disneyland and it's 96 degrees and it's 3 p.m. and they start flailing themselves on that asphalt, do I beat them? Joke. No. Why? Because I have a bigger perspective of them. I can make a different observation about who they are. And you know what I can say? You're 3. It's 1,000,000 degrees outside. There's all these people. You're probably just hungry. I love the acronym HALT for addicts. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. What if God just looks at you all the time when you're having your tantrums inside or externally, just says, just halt. You're hungry. You're angry. You're lonely. You're tired. I'm not angry or mad at you in the middle of this tiny little storm or this weather anomaly. What if I just know you don't have it all figured out yet, but you can one day? You'll be okay one day. And today's just another opportunity for growth. What a better relationship we can have with God. Sometimes the tools I was given in conservative Christianity, again, where there's a magical God who's going to take care of everything. But I'll be honest, sometimes there's tools that I'm given in liberalism in which I think that I'm going to become a Marvel hero. Because if I go to enough therapy, and if I do enough of the work, and if I read enough Richard Rohr, then I will somehow have the inability to be triggered by anyone ever again in my life. Any of you ever believe that? You're like, I listen to Super Soul Sunday every single week. I have listened to Byron Katie. I have done all of these things, right? And I think if I just keep doing enough work, then I will be a guru floating through the world. And I'll be like, try to aggravate me. Try to come. You can't me. I am a super liberal. Look at me. I don't know why I stood here. It just felt right. Thank you for allowing me to do that. Any of you ever buy into that? And you realize, no, you're still just human. I get it. You can go to endless therapy, and it's a good thing. It's a practical tool, but it's not going to forever save you. You're still going to have to deal with storms. And part of the ways that we deal with storms, again, is we make observations about who God is in those storms, and then we begin to make practices around that. So what are some of the practices that you can make about who God is in this storm? Is it gratitude? Is it old school, like quiet time, things like that? Is that too triggering for you? Is it going for a hike? Is it connecting with art or with nature? What are the things that remind you that God is with you? That God is for you? That God is ahead of you? Maybe it's looking back through the storms in your life 8 years ago and you naming those storms and you saying, I never thought I would get through that. Have you ever had that storm and in the middle of it, you're like, I never thought I could get through that. I'm alone? Perfect. There we go, 3 of us. And you did. Maybe you go make some notes and you reflect on your life and say, that's where God was at for me. God actually was with me in that. God was for me in that. God was ahead of me that I would have never seen at the time, but I can see it now. And now I'm just going to have better eyes as I move forward and observe what God is doing. And then the story goes on. And it says that Jesus got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. And then the wind died down, and it was completely gone. And he said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And they were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Even in the winds and the waves obey him. One of the other things that we take in as we're going through the boat, as we're going through storms, is we have to ask ourselves the question of who's out there with us in the boat? I recently went through a storm about a year ago, and it was a time in my life where I had to make a lot of observations about myself. You start off sometimes in storms, and you're, woe is me, I'm the victim here. And then sometimes you sit in storms and you say, I got a part in this. I got some growing up to do in this. There's some maturity for me here. That's okay. I can handle this. I know that God is with me. I know that God is for me. I know that God is ahead of me. And then one of the things that you do in the storms as you mature, as you grow, is you just don't let anybody in your boat, by the way. That's what I did 8 Corys ago. I would let anybody in the boat with me. And some of these people were not helpful. Some of these people were toxic. Some of these people had great titles, like pastor, like therapist, like whatever. By the way, I love when liberals are like, I will never trust a pastor. But then you're like, but I will trade that authority for a therapist. Both just people, by the way. Both can be very helpful tools, and I've known amazing pastors and therapists. I've known plenty of pastors and therapists that I see their kids, no thank you. You see what I'm saying there? All right, fair enough. It's just real, right? We want to trade authority all the time. But sometimes you just got to ask yourself, who am I putting in the boat with me? Who is here observing my life with me? And it's okay just to say no. My voice really cracked. That was crazy. No. That's the biggest thing I've learned this last year of my life. No thanks. I'm not looking for a new best friend. I'm not looking for that kind of friend. The kind of cleaned house. And the people that I have in my boat, the realization that I have is I know now clearer than ever. I asked myself some questions a year ago. Do I still want to be a pastor? Do I want to still be in this position? Is this the life that I still want? And with a resounding yes, and it was a resounding answer of yes. This is exactly what I want to do. I love doing this. And I have a different viewpoint of who God is here with me, who God is here for me, and how God is ahead of me. And then one of the big things I had to do is just look at the other people around me and say, do I have the right people around me? Sometimes it was yes, sometimes it was no. And I had to learn some lessons there about tools, right? And I put some things into practice. I had to make some boundaries. I had a friend, he would call me for like 20 years. This is not an exaggeration, 20 years. We went to college together. He's a great guy. He's got a great family. You ever just have someone call you and you're just like, God, I don't want to pick up the phone. I just don't want to. It just doesn't add anything to my life anymore. I'm doing it to be kind because, we were roommates, but I just don't want to hang out, to be honest. Sometimes it's that simple. And you know what I did? I just gently said, I'm not going to pick up the call anymore. It's not you, really, it's not. It's one of those. It's just not where I'm at in my life. I only want people in my boat where I experience mutuality with you. I'm a pastor. I show up to a lot of coffees and beers where there's no mutuality. I'm okay with that for the things that I do in caring for people. But for my friends, no chance in hell do you get to be in my boat if there's not mutuality. If you're not giving the way that I'm giving, we don't need to be here together, and that's okay. I had to break up with my therapist. Thank you for 9 years of caring for me. What you offer me now is not what I need. Have you ever been with your therapist for so long, you're just like making up stuff now? You're just like, yeah, here we go. No, he served his purpose in my life. What a gift. But he's not my therapist anymore. Who are the people in your life that you need to observe? And what boundaries do you need to practice right now? Who do you need to say yes to? And who do you need to say no to? And then finally, what you need to ask yourself in the storms is, where am I at? Rigorous honesty, rigorous self-awareness. You got to take a hard look and make observations of yourself and say, when I'm in these storms, what are some of the patterns that I repeat? Do I notice that when I look through these 8 different storms, something that I learned is I blame a lot of other people. I do a lot of this. And in the last couple storms, I had to do a lot of this. I had to look in a bunch of mirrors. One of the things, I learned different patterns in the storms where I got to ask people that I really trusted around me. What are some things that you notice here? I noticed that I've had a couple storms that seem similar lately. Why do you think that that is? It's hard work just being honest with yourself. It's hard work just admitting, I may have created a little bit of these weather patterns. Or I'll notice, and this is the one that I lose my mind in storms, I actually was a great friend, a great person, a great leader, and you still tried to destroy me. Right? Betrayal is the worst, by the way. And I had to learn different tools of how do I deal with that? Do I go out and do the opposite of what I really believe? Do I go out and try to hurt other people because they hurt me? Or do I have to take a hard look in the storm and say, no, this is actually why I follow Jesus? Because I refuse to transmit the pain. I will be somebody who transforms it. And I believe in that. And those are hard lessons to learn. So you have to ask yourself, can you name the storms in your life that have evolved who you are? The different versions of yourself. Can you name the ways that God's been with you and for you and ahead of you? Can you name the people in your boat? Can you make some observations about who they are? Can you put some practices in place? You might need to throw people overboard gently, and you might need to bring a couple other people on board. Can you begin to have honest observations about yourself and the storms that are taking place in your life and the ways that you've navigated it? Are there tools that you can practice that can help you grow? Maybe that is the therapist. Maybe that is a jog. Maybe that is just a new gym that you sign up for. Maybe there's different tools that you take on so that you can begin to navigate your life in the storms a little bit better. We're all in this thing together. At the end of the day, New Abbey, the reason we talk about it is this. As I look about some different storms I've had in my life over the last 5 years, one thing I know to be true. So many of you were there for me. Thank you. And I know this. I've got to be there for so many of you in many of your storms. And I know this. Brent, I know the relationships of people that you have here and the people that have cared for you. How 11 years of sobriety, right, is a beautiful gift, and you've offered that gift of sobriety to other people. Mickey and Jaime, that you're sitting here today, that you're doing a coming out documentary about later in life, and that you're doing it by telling the story of your church community. What I know about this, New Abbey, is that storms will come. I don't have all of the answers for it, but thankfully God is with us. Thankfully we can do the work on our own, and thankfully we're not in it by ourselves, that we have one another to navigate it with. Would you find those same 3 or 4 people together, and would you answer this question? What tools have you gained through the storms in your life? Joy.